You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I am Robin Morgan. You know, I try to find a moment every day or two to be positive and affirmative about things because it's important, but so hard sometimes given the mass of, crap that's being lobbed at us ceaselessly by the Trump regime. But there were two things in the past week that made me able to get up and do my little dance. And one was the sight of Harvey Weinstein in handcuffs, and the other, the sight of Paul Manafort behind bars. These are things that my lower self joys in, and, you know, given the harm that they've caused and the hurt and the pain, my higher self gets involved too. Anyway, my guests this week also make me feel much better, ready to do a little dance. The first is a returnee to the program. In fact, both of them are. The first is a former district attorney who's going to bring us behind the scenes of the Weinstein case, what it means abroad in the rest of the country, and what it means to the women's movement as a whole, and what is expected for it to do and have the effects that we need it to have in the future. And my other guest is a Muslim women's leader who has been on the program before, a wise woman who founded a group called Wise, and who has a new book on being Muslim, female, and a feminist, and it's quite terrific. So all that's coming up, plus Surrealism Corner and Fighting Words, and let's start by going inside the headlines. Thanks to the Trump regime, and perhaps tragically fittingly, the United States has ended its participation in the United Nations Human Rights Council, the world's most important human rights body. The U.S. did so ostensibly in protest over the Council's frequent criticism of Israel's treatment of Palestinians, although Israel itself remains a participant of the Council. The U.S. now joins Iran, North Korea, and Eritrea as the only countries refusing to participate. This next story changes by the minute, but one thing is for sure. It wasn't a real executive order reuniting families, it was a photo op. Trump's executive order is not retroactive. There are no plans to reunite the already illegally incarcerated parents seeking asylum, with their now almost 3,000 children already scattered across 14 states, and there's no effective tracing system for even locating these children. As for those parents still trying to fight back despite being jailed for having sought asylum and jobs, it turns out that Trump quietly shaved down the budget for immigration public defenders in advance of initiating the separation policy. But bravo to whistleblowers and to the press for smuggling out the pictures of children kept in cages and the audio tapes of their sobbing for their mothers. More about this later, but the pressure is on Trump, and it's still building. Although public transport reduces traffic, spurs economic development, and fights global climate change, it faces a network of activists who use sophisticated data services to identify and rally voters opposing public transit, claiming it wastes taxpayer money. The funders behind this network, Americans for Prosperity, which recently helped defeat a transit plan in Nashville, Tennessee, are the Koch brothers, who have put millions into opposing public transport because the Koch brothers' financial interests benefit from automobiles and highways, and never mind the environmental effects. An in-depth investigative piece by Natalie Kitrioff and Jessica Silver Greenberg in the New York Times, June 15th, is far too long and exhaustive to quote here, but it's a real winner. The article is about the continuation of rampant discrimination against pregnant women in the United States, despite legislation and despite attempts at policy change. The number of pregnancy discrimination claims filed annually with the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission has risen steadily over the past 2 decades and now hovers at an all-time high. Pregnant or not, in fact, female or male, I recommend this article to you. And here are 2 bittersweet items, but with a happy ending, sort of. It took a quarter of a century, but Sally Hemmings is now a major figure in newly renovated space at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation. Hemmings, an enslaved woman, quote, owned by Jefferson before, during, and after his presidency, was also the half-sister of Jefferson's deceased wife, Martha, and Sally had an almost 40-year de facto marriage with him and bore him 6 children. It has taken all this time for the defenders of Jefferson's purity to lose their battle against DNA evidence and other historical proof, and now Sally Hemmings has her own exhibit at Monticello. Retroactive praise to historian Annette Gordon-Reed, whose 1998 book, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemmings, An American Controversy, re-broke open the silence. And for the past 3 years, some of the most striking examples of the giant sequoias in the Sierra Nevada were off-limits to visitors in Yosemite National Park. But the Mariposa Grove, a stand of around 500 mature giant sequoias, has reopened after a $40 million renovation that rerouted parking and roads for the 7,000 cars that converge there daily. So, drive-by naturalism isn't that easy anymore, but people can damned well get out and walk a little, and the trees can actually breathe. Time for a short break now. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I am Robin Morgan. And when I return, I'll be returning to a returnee to this program, a guest who's been our go-to person on sexual harassment cases and the law. In fact, sexual violence against women and the law in the courts. Jane Manning, herself a former prosecutor and the knowledgeable source on this subject. And she's going to tell us what the Harvey Weinstein case has in future for itself and what that means in the broader climate of the courts and prosecutors around the country. It's fascinating, so stick with us.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have back on the program Jane Manning, who began her career as a prosecutor, specializing in cases of domestic violence, child abuse, and sex crimes. In private practice, then, she provided pro bono representation to a coalition of battered women's organizations. She then joined the international human rights organization Equality Now, where she coordinated a successful campaign for a strong and comprehensive law against human trafficking in New York State, and helped write New York's first anti-trafficking statute. She now serves as Director of Advocacy for Women's Justice Now, a partner of the National Organization for Women, NYC, focusing on their Take Rape Seriously program and their campaign to combat drug-facilitated sexual assault. As I say, always comforting to have her wisdom back on the show. Jane Manning. Jane, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live. It's always good to get you back here.
Thank you so much, Robin. It's so good to be back.
Well, it's an actually, I wouldn't quite say celebratory, but it's a positive occasion in that Harvey Weinstein, of course, has been formally charged now and indicted and is facing trial in New York. And you have always been we've come back to you many times, you're our go-to person on the law and sexual violence, both in your capacity as a former prosecutor,
Yes.
and in your capacity with the National Organization for Women. So, bring us up to speed on the Weinstein case in particular, and then also is this a turning point for women in the criminal justice system? Is it just a moment? Is it a sea change? What do we have to do to make it more permanent? All that good stuff.
Great. Those are really good questions. So the Harvey Weinstein case. Harvey Weinstein has been indicted by a grand jury in New York City and Manhattan for sexual assaults pertaining to two different women. So in one case, he was indicted for criminal sexual act, which pertains to allegations that he forced oral sex on a young woman. And that young woman is public with her identity. Her name is Lucia Evans, and she is a courageous woman. The other woman, who is equally courageous, has not yet shared her name publicly, but Harvey Weinstein has been indicted for counts of first-degree rape and third-degree rape, both pertaining to that woman whose name has not yet been publicly revealed, but will likely be during the course of the trial.
Explain to us novices what's the difference between first-degree rape and third-degree rape, please.
So rape laws are, of course, different in every state. Rape is a matter of state law in the vast majority of cases. So in New York State, one way that a case can be a first-degree rape is if the perpetrator uses forcible compulsion, so uses physical force to overcome the victim's lack of consent. And then third-degree rape is a statute that was enacted only within the past 20 years in New York State, and it's a statute that's sometimes called the no means no statute, and it pertains to incidents of non-consensual sex that may not rise to the level of forcible compulsion, but where the victim clearly says no and the perpetrator goes forward without her consent anyway. So that's third-degree rape.
I see.
So Harvey Weinstein is charged with both of those counts with respect to one victim, and then with a forcible count of forced oral sex with respect to another victim.
Okay. Next question. How come there's only two victims in this case of this double charge when there were so many, hundreds of women who came forth?
Yes.
What is that, because it's out of the jurisdiction of New York, or why is that?
So we know that we know that there were more than two women who came forward to report sexual assaults that Harvey Weinstein committed in New York City. We know there were more than two women.
Yes.
Only two sets of charges have been brought. And we don't know if that's because other counts were outside the statute of limitations, or whether there were other cases that perhaps the DA's office chose not to pursue. We don't know the answer to all of those things. And we also don't know if there are more charges to come. So there very well could be women whose accounts are still under investigation. It's not impossible that we could see further indictments in New York City. It's also very possible that we might see further indictments in other jurisdictions. So there are at least 3 other jurisdictions where Harvey Weinstein is being investigated. One of them is L.A., one of them actually is Canada, and one of them is London. So
yes, I knew about the English one. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So women have come forward with reports in all of those jurisdictions. This could very well be just the beginning for Harvey Weinstein's legal problems.
So it sounds that way. On a previous show, Jane, I talked about the fact that, women shouldn't despair because although we like to think that our justice system is in fact blind to pressure and is independent and so forth, it's a construct of a patriarchal system, and it's still largely staffed by patriarchal judges. And although we've made changes in dents, it is changing, no question. It's our last bastion against Trump, for example, on immigration, on so many things. But on 2 different occasions, and I said this on a previous show, the DA in New York City, Cyrus Vance Jr., he let Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who had assaulted a chambermaid in a New York hotel, pass. And then, of course, so much came out about Dominique Strauss-Kahn in Europe that he had been involved in a prostitution ring, that he had to step down. He no longer was a candidate for president of France. Too bad. And then also there was an earlier case where the police felt that they had a, lock, stock, and barrel case against Harvey Weinstein, and he declined to prosecute. So this time around, it's my understanding that, it clearly was a matter of history. Feminists took to the streets and protested, right. And I think you were one of them, and certainly I was one of them. But what made a difference this time, do you think? I think it's the pressure from the women's movement, and that nobody should ever think that pressure goes nowhere. Of course, it'll never be admitted, but I think it does make a difference to lobby and educate, because some guys don't get it.
All of that is exactly right, Robin. That's right. The criminal justice system has never improved itself for women, right? The criminal justice system has gotten better for women over time because feminists have fought for change, and because survivors have spoken up and fought for change. And that is certainly true in the Harvey Weinstein case as well. And I loved what you said in the beginning of our conversation about the question, is this part of a larger moment? Because to me, the arrest and prosecution of Harvey Weinstein is an opportunity for a reckoning not only with sexual predators, but with a criminal justice system that has traditionally failed to hold them accountable, and in too many cases is still failing to hold them accountable.
Yeah. And the atmosphere has so changed. On the one hand, it took so long for some of us who have been at this for quite a while. On the other hand, it seemed to change overnight because of the Me Too eruption. The very interesting example is the Cosby trial, which even a year or so ago was locked and didn't come, went nowhere, had to be retried, and this time around came through with a guilty verdict. The shift is noticeable. And what do we do to make it stay?
Yes, what do we do to make it stay is a great question, because so far the Me Too movement has really shown a lot of success in changing our thinking as a culture, right? I do believe that women are being believed and taken seriously more than we were a year or 2 years ago. And also, there are some changes beginning to happen to workplace practices. And those two things are really encouraging. But I'd love to see the Me Too movement making progress on a third front, right? And that is the criminal justice system. Right. So, it's important to know how far the criminal justice system has come, because a few decades ago, the justice system was literally closed to victims of rape and sexual assault. There were laws deliberately in place that made it virtually impossible to prosecute any rape case. There were corroboration requirements that didn't apply to any other kind of witness in any other kind of crime. Right. There were requirements that the woman prove that she put up earnest resistance, right?
I remember all that. Right.
Yes, you were one of the feminists who fought to change all of that. And also there was no such thing as a rape shield law, right? So when a rape victim was brave enough to come forward and testify, the trial was often referred to as a second rape, because cross-examination about every detail of her intimate life was so brutal that it was often experienced by victims as akin to another rape. I
remember a time when there were no marital rape laws. I remember
that's right. Much more recently, in the 1980s, there were.
That's right.
Yeah. So none of those things changed themselves. They were changed because feminists fought to change them. And the reason I bring this up is that when we look at how far we still have to go, right? How many survivors of sexual assault are still not getting justice in the criminal justice system. It's tempting for a lot of advocates to despair and to give up and to say, the criminal justice system is it's so broken, there's nothing we can do to fix it. And it's important to understand that if we had taken that attitude 40 years ago, we wouldn't be at the state of partial progress where we are today.
Absolutely. And I think Exhibit A in this, which almost got past me, but I think it's cause for real celebration, is that in the California primaries, the recent elections, Judge Persky was recalled. Now, that is an example of the people rising up and saying, just a bloody minute here. Judge Persky was the guy who, in the trial some years ago, of an athlete, a very popular young athlete.
Brock Turner, privileged, white male, champion swimmer.
Accused of sexual assault, and the judge
convicted.
And the judge gave him, I think, 6 months, and he served 3. And there have been repeated attempts. Everybody was stunned by that. I mean, and there have been repeated attempts to recall him, and this time it succeeded. That is the people really speaking and saying, we want justice back in our justice system.
Yes, exactly right. And again, that recall didn't happen by itself. It happened because a courageous law professor named Michelle Dauber turned activist, and she organized a campaign, and she raised money, to publicize the campaign, and she did grassroots organizing, and she really deserves a vote of thanks from those of us who. Yeah,
absolutely. And hopefully that will send a message, one never knows, but to other judges who are, tempted to tap a rapist on the wrist and say, we don't want to ruin this nice young man's life, they claim, as opposed to wondering what will happen to that nice young woman's life,
Exactly right. And unfortunately, it's not just judges who need to be held accountable. It's police and prosecutors as well. My organization is Women's Justice Now, and we're a partner of the National Organization for Women. And we represent survivors in many different cities. And what we see is that in so many cases, survivors do exactly what we say we want them to do, right? Which is come forward and report rape and sexual assault. And yet we see police and prosecutors not holding up their end of the bargain, and we see them failing to do diligent investigations, failing to secure critical evidence, and failing to treat the victim as a valued witness who's doing an important social service, public service by coming forward. And it's impossible to overstate the degree to which the failure of police and prosecutors to take rape seriously is inflicting additional harm on survivors. It is deterring survivors from reporting, and it's deterring survivors from continuing to participate in criminal prosecutions. And as a result, public safety is suffering, because what we know about sex offenders is that they tend to be recidivists.
Of course.
And we know that when a survivor comes forward and reports a sexual assault, it is likely that this perpetrator has done it before, will do it again, and that this is a precious opportunity to protect future women and girls and boys and men from a dangerous person. Too often our criminal justice system doesn't treat rape and sexual assault cases that way.
Right. No, every conviction in this case is a prevention. It's extremely important. When does the Weinstein case come to trial now, Jane?
Well, that remains to be seen. A criminal case, there will be a lot of pretrial procedure. So there will be motions, there will be discovery. It can easily take a year for a criminal case to go to trial, and it can take longer. So there's no trial date that's been set yet. He was just recently indicted. The next thing that will happen will be, pretrial motions on issues like discovery and other legal matters. Yeah. And we don't know whether his attorneys will be pushing for a quick resolution or whether they'll be pushing for, to slow things down. Right. It may be that they try to slow things down, because one tactic they might be trying to take would be to see what's happening in other jurisdictions, and to see if there's any way they can work out some kind of deal that would cover all of his cases in different jurisdictions. That might be something they might try to do. Again, that's speculation. Harvey Weinstein is a pretty arrogant guy. He may think that he can beat all of these charges, and he may want to go to trial on all of them. So there's a lot that remains to be seen in terms of his defense strategy.
The hubris of these men is staggering.
Yes.
It's just amazing.
It is staggering.
Well, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all this, real factual, basic stuff, and also the overview of what's happening in the country and what we can do about it. Bless you, because you've always been an absolute beacon of feminist comprehension of the law and ways to help the law be the law. In these lawless days under Trump, it's very comforting to know that you're there. Thank you, dearest Jane Manning, for being with us again on Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much, Robin. And can I say that in some of my dark moments, it is really a joy to me to read your book of poems, Dark Matter.
Oh, wow. No, I did not expect that coming, but thank you. Thank you.
They are telling me things that are just what I need to hear.
Wow. Oh, well, you know how to make my day. My God. This was totally unsolicited. Honest to God.
Certainly was. It certainly was.
I am an honest person, and the person I am speaking to is an officer of the court. So we are not there's no BS going down here. But thank you. My day is definitely made now. all this legal knowledge too. My God. Thank you for everything again. And thank you for that too.
Thank you, Robin.
And now, you know what it's time for? Yep, it's time for the Surrealism Corner. The BBC reports recent research on voice, pitch, and power. Research ranging from Australia to Illinois, including Sweden, Canada, the Netherlands, and Japan. The studies found that women today speak at a deeper pitch than our mothers and grandmothers. Comparing archival recordings of women speaking in 1945 with more recent recordings, researchers found that the fundamental frequency had dropped by 23 hertz over 5 decades, a significant audible difference. The research had carefully selected for and controlled for potential demographic factors, including age, who was taking the pill, smoking, cultural differences, dialects, etc. But the drop in pitch was consistent, and researchers surmise that the rise of women to more prominence has been leading us to adopt a tone that projects authority. By the way, as an FYI, there was a time when women were unthinkable as radio hosts because, as it was openly stated by stations and networks, women's voices were simply, naturally, too shrill. Just before the World Cup started, a Russian legislator urged her country's women who would be attending to avoid sex with foreigners of different races. Honestly. Tamara Pletnyovova, a lawmaker in the Communist Party and head of a state congressional committee on children and family affairs, said, quote, "There will be girls who meet men and then they will give birth. Maybe they will get married, maybe they won't, but the kids will suffer just like they suffered in 1980. Close quote. She was referring to children born out of wedlock following the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow. She went on, "It is one thing if the parents are of the same race, quite another if they're of different races. Women should give birth to our own children." Period. Close quote. And 2 quickies in closing. The first, a 6 degrees of separation story broken by BuzzFeed News. Joe Hagan, Trump's deputy chief of staff for operations, previously worked closely in Libya with a man named Basit Igtet, a key backer of the sex cult NXIVM, which is now at the center of a major sex trafficking case. And, second, though a 2014 United Nations report on Trump's new BFF bro, North Korea's Kim Jong-un, and his crimes, including extermination, torture, forced abortions, sexual violence, forcible population transfers, enforced disappearance of persons, and knowingly causing prolonged starvation. Oh, carp, United Nations. Still, despite that broad picture, I can't resist an example of Kim's attention to detail. In 2016, Kim Yong-jin, Deputy Premier for Education, was accused of showing, quote, disrespectful posture in a meeting. He died before a firing squad. And Hyun Yong-choi, a general over the armed forces, actually dared fall asleep during a meeting, and that was a costly nap. He was executed with an anti-aircraft gun. How's that for surreal? And is the Surrealism Corner getting darker these days? Time for another short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I am Robin Morgan, and I'll be back in just a few minutes with a new guest who is an old visitor to this program. She is a Muslim leader who has focused on women's rights in Islam, on educating the world as to what Islam really is and isn't, and also focused on the plight of young males in Islam being tempted by forces from the dark side and how to keep that from happening. Now she's written a fascinating book about her personal journey, and she's here to tell us all about it. Coming right up, Daisy Khan.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. You know, we read quite a lot these days about young women activists in the Muslim world, and that is so exciting and deliciously encouraging. But it's also important, I think, to look at the women whose shoulders they stand on. And one of these is my guest, a return guest. She's not all that much older than the real young ones, but she's been around for a long time, and she carries with her a sense of wisdom and maturity that many people lack in every religion all over the world. Daisy Khan was raised in a progressive Muslim family in the shadows of the Himalayan mountains, but she grew up having a bit of culture shock when her family sent her to the States to attend high school in a mostly Jewish Long Island suburb. Her journey, including her spiritual journey, she has put down in a book called Born with Wings. It's a fascinating journey during which she embraced her role as an advocate for women. She devised ways to help end child marriage, to fight against FGM, and to educate young Muslims to resist false promises from ISIS recruiters. She's here today to talk about Born with Wings, and it's always a real pleasure to welcome her back to Women's Media Center Live, my friend and sister, Daisy Khan. Daisy, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me back.
It's called Born with Wings, which is a beautiful title, The Spiritual Journey of a Modern Muslim Woman. And the Born with Wings comes from a quote by Rumi, the great Sufi poet, of since everyone was born with wings, so why would you settle for crawling through life?
Right.
It's absolutely beautiful. And one of the most amazing collection of blurbs I've ever seen, Daisy, ranging from Her Majesty Queen Noor of Jordan through to, what is her name again? Yes, of course, Anat Hoffman, who is the chair of the board for the Women of the Wall, the brave Jewish women who keep trying to pray at the wall in Jerusalem and keep being turned away by the patriarchal Israeli government. So it's a whole range of women coming forward to say how special you are and how glad they are to work with you. Congratulations again, my dear.
Thank you so much.
Well, tell us about Born with Wings. How did you come to write this cross between a memoir and a diary and organizing history? It's a wonderful mix.
Yeah, so I was actually looking to publish a glossy photo book of 100 heroines of Islam because I had started an organization called WISE, Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. And at one of our conferences, we decided that all these amazing women from all over the women, their stories needed to be told. So we took these beautiful photos, portraits of these women, along with a little bit about what inspires their work. And so I had set out to look for a publisher. Mm-hmm. So I went to a literary agent and showed them the kaleidoscope of women's faces, and they looked at me and said, well, there's a problem. The market for illustrated books is gone. And they inquired about these women. Who were these women? And I told them a little bit about how these women were at the front line of creating a change in their communities from all over the world. And then they asked me, well, since illustrated books are basically not dead and nobody publishes them, had I thought of writing my own book. And that's how the seed for the book was planted in my head. And I thought, who's going to read my book? And they smiled at each other and said, well, we would. Yeah,
there you go. That's and it's a good start, a hell of a good start. Yes. Yeah, it is an amazing story. I, of course, first got to know you because of the hysteria over there being a mosque built near the site of 9/11 here in Manhattan. And I do use the word hysteria advisedly in this particular case because it was seen as, oh my God, it was all you. This was in the every Muslim is a terrorist period, whereas now it's only maybe every other Muslim is a terrorist. I wouldn't say it's gotten better, but the madness was at its, of course, fever peak. And you and your husband were these incredible rational voices, and you, of course, also were clearly a feminist. You were already doing amazing work with women, and I want to get into that too. But the book lays out this progressive journey. Take us on a sort of bite-sized version of that journey. You were born in Kashmir, and it was a progressive Muslim family. That's a good start.
Yeah. So my grandfather was, I say progressive because my grandfather was one of these unusual people who, really valued education, and he applied for a scholarship and miraculously got a scholarship, fully paid scholarship to Harvard. So he came to the U.S. and, and returned back to Kashmir to build bridges and roads and all manifestations of great engineering. And he would regale us with the stories of America and how great a nation it was, how Islamic it was in its ethics, because that's what he saw. He said, this is like Islam in action, the civility of people, the fairness, the justice, the rule of law that he saw here. He was so enamored that he wanted to create that in Kashmir. And when it was time for, me to pursue my education, he said, you belong in America. This is the place where you'll be able to realize your potential, because I was an artist, and there were the only two noble professions for artistic people and, for women in Kashmir was either become a doctor or teacher. And so I was artistically inclined, and so I was sent to America. But before that, although I was born in a Muslim home, we were sent to Christian missionary schools. And my teachers were Hindu, girls I played with were Sikhs. We bought freshwater pearls from Buddhists, and we were always told we were from the lost 10th tribe of Israel. And at the age of 15, I actually landed in a 99% Jewish neighborhood, Jericho, Long Island. And so I think that my interaction with different religions really happened in my childhood, and it set the tone for how my own worldview, because I had, learned how to celebrate different cultures, different religions, and to honor one's traditions. And then I came to America, and there I was, the kind of the lonely single Muslim who had to advocate, who had to become a speaker, an ambassador for all of Islam, because, the Iranian Revolution had just unfolded, and people were asking questions. I was a young student, and then immediately after that, Salman Rushdie affair happened, and book burnings and fatwas, and a lot of these things I could not process, and that led to a full-blown spiritual crisis, which I spent a fair amount of ink in the book talking about how difficult it was, how difficult the journey, how difficult that time was, but also how difficult it was to come back to my faith. Because having been grown up in a very progressive home, women were treated with utmost respect. They were honored. We were co-stewards of society, and yet the images I was seeing of Muslim women around the world did not match with that. And I began to question everything, and that questioning forced me to delve into my own self, into self-discovery, and eventually God discovery.
It's a very candid book. I mean, the level of vulnerability and honesty in it about your own struggles with faith are very touching and let us in. I mean, it's inclusive in a very literal way. And you entered in through the Sufi door, the folks who gave us great literature and great, and an approach to faith, if one is going to have one, that is at least ecstatic and poetic. So you won me over there.
Yeah, it was. I was, rebelling, and I was angry, and I was looking for a place which would show me the love of God, not the wrath of God. And that's what the Sufis did. They showed me that God is love, and I can have my own personal relationship with God, and everything emanated from there. Because once I got to know who I really was in relation to the cosmos, in relation to other humans, in relation to God, I was able to everything manifested outward. And all the questioning that I'd had, led to my sort of own character development as a human being, what's really important. And that manifesting out eventually led to my own activism, because I was now prepared to help others.
Yes. And you focused, of course, on women. I mean, and you have done really extraordinary things. I mean, as a woman's advocate, I mean, innovative ways to help end child marriage, the fight against genital mutilation in the Muslim world, in Muslim societies, educating young Muslim women to resist the false promises of ISIS recruiters, the founding of WISE, of WISE itself, and the Women's Shura. Talk to us about these activities, in particular the Women's Shura that you created. These issues that I began to see around the world pertaining to Muslim women didn't match with the reality that my scripture talked about, And so I saw a double standard there, and I did not understand that. So I felt that the only way to solve this issue was to go deeper into our scripture. And so at one of our conferences, we asked the women what was the biggest impediment to their own progress. And we were surprised that all the women said it was distorted scriptural interpretation was the highest or the biggest barrier. So we knew that the solution had to lie there, that we had to find a solution within that. And so I suggested that we create a Shura Council, which is a consensus council, a body, because Islam is not a centralized faith. So there are many Shura councils that advocate on behalf of communities. So it's kind of like the only democratic forum. So we created the Shura Council, which was run by women, about 40 of them. We started out, and it was a global group that came together, all voluntary group, and we listed the top 10 deadly sins against women, and we said one by one we're going to try and address each of these issues. But the way we address them is by really going back into our scriptures to look at what the Quran says, to see what the Prophet said, to see what the other scholars over the last 1400 years have said about this issue. And can we even reinterpret something ourselves? And the result was, we created a position paper on called Jihad Against Violence, which was a condemnation of terrorism. Although it was not a woman's issue, we felt it was very important because it was affecting all of society. And every issue is a woman's issue. I mean, we're half the world. So
exactly. Yeah, because we're the glue that holds everything together. And, we're the glue that holds the family together, the community together, the society together. And if we unravel and if we don't do something, then who is going to do it? Right. So we felt that we really needed to address that. Then we addressed the issue of domestic violence. Then we addressed the issue of female genital mutilation. And one by one, these position papers were used by our activists on the ground to carry out educational awareness campaigns. And that's where the rubber met the road, because we were really having significant impact by re-educating people about the harmfulness of female genital mutilation, for instance. Yes. Our papers have been so effective that in Gambia, I was just in Gambia this year, that they passed legislation to ban female genital mutilation. But it took us 5-6 years to do awareness campaigns with all the imams at the local level using this position paper to convince them that this is not Quranic, this is not what the Prophet did. In Saudi Arabia, they don't do this practice, so why are you doing it? Right. And it was all customary. So a lot of these issues are customary issues, customs carried over by centuries from different traditions. Right. And they have no root in religion, but people mistake it for being religious. Exactly. What incredibly viable and valuable work this is that you've been doing. You keep on in the face of threats from all sides and, and anger and impediments. You keep on keeping on. Well, I think that we have to. Each of us have to do our part, and that's why I invite the reader into my life. And, like you said, I've opened myself up quite a bit, and to some people's surprise. But I really want to highlight the interaction of all these women around the world, besides myself, to show how distress and danger can be transformed into hope and triumph. That was my goal. Well, and I think that the other goal I have is that we need to unite together so that we can, we look at the Me Too movement here. Imagine if the Me Too movement came together with the Muslim Me Too movement, which has been going on for many years. Right. And so we can unite together so we can breathe life into this vision of gender equality globally. Yes. And I think that's the work that lies ahead, and that's why I want to have a broader conversation. And that's why I shared so much in the book and about other women's activism and how they are risking their lives every single day. And so through my story, I'm also telling the story of other women. You certainly are. I mean, this is not one of those me memoirs. But although it is personal and revealing and very well written and enormously touching. I mean, it's a book of courage. And you know what? It's also the perfect book to answer that silly statement that some people make. Well, one person can't make a difference, because this is one woman making a real difference. And you should, if you don't, and I hope you do, feel very, very good about that. The book is called Born with Wings: The Spiritual Journey of a Modern Muslim Woman. And the author, of course, is our friend Daisy Khan. And I'm so grateful to you for doing the book and for coming back to see us at Women's Media Center Live. Thank you so much for having me, and I really, really want the readers to engage with me. So if they read my book and they get inspired or they have any suggestions, they can always go to daisycon.com and send me a personal message. I've written this. I want to go and meet varied audiences across the country to engage in a heart-to-heart conversation so we can open minds, clarify misconceptions, and inspire them to act in their own way. And so, so this book is also about that. It's to inspire other people to take action in their own lives. It's beautiful. And so are you. Thanks again, Daisy. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And it's time for one last break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be back in just a moment with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again with some fighting words. Brace yourselves. It's only the tip of the horror we're seeing so far. For example, caregivers have not been licensed. Caregivers for these children have not been vetted for example, pedophilia. But we do know that one father committed suicide while in custody, and we do know that one mother died of unknown causes while in custody. Pressure. It was pressure that got us this far. Trump's own Republican Party was finally in an uproar, with both the House and Senate publicly joining Democrats in attacking the policy. Pressure. Starting with American Airlines, other carriers began to refuse to work with the government in flying children to other facilities across the country, since those along the border were already so crowded. Hundreds of employees at Microsoft demanded that the company sever its data mining relationship with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Employees and TV and film creators at 21st Century Fox publicly denounced their corporate cousin, Fox News, for its lying coverage of the border crisis. Governors, mostly Democrats, but including Republicans, from at least 8 states, and still growing, announced that they would withhold or recall National Guard troops from efforts to secure the border. In fact, we need the Defense Department to step up now and refuse to send its people, whether JAG as lawyers or military, to build more camps. Pediatricians, psychologists, nurses associations, teachers groups, and other organizations planned major demonstrations across the country and in Washington, D.C. for this weekend. We learned this snowballing process from Me Too. But meanwhile, local protests didn't want to wait. People in one city brought children's shoes to a growing pile in the city center, soon a small mountain, reminiscent of an exhibit at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. Perhaps a dazed nation is waking from its coma, outraged. But will it work? Pressure works. The more pressure, the more it works. And let's not forget that in the presence of non-pressure, history not only repeats itself, it stutters. The United States government tore indigenous children from their families, severed communication with their tribes and nations, and sent them to dreaded government schools where they were forbidden to speak their own languages, observe their own rights, and their own belief systems. And don't let's ever forget that kids were sold off separately from their parents at slave auctions. Not all the cries of all the women reaching out for their children as those kids, straining back at them, were led away in chains. Not all the grief, the rage, the resolve to survive. None of this is new, after all, in America. And there is a famous quote from the Holocaust in Europe, the Shoah, by a little boy, maybe 10 years old, as he was being dragged off during mass arrests after the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto. The child looked back over his frail shoulder and cried out, "You won't be forgiven. Not any of you. Not ever." We need more pressure. Pressure works. Pressure. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com for the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. You can also stream, download, and subscribe to our show's podcast at iTunes, at Stitcher, and at Google Play. Be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter, and you can check out my website and blog at robinmorgan.net and find me on Facebook and Twitter, too. My latest book, Dark Matter, New Poems, is available online and off wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. And I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.